Have you ever wondered what the water in your local lake is trying to tell you? Sometimes it's a story of vibrant health, but other times it's a pretty clear warning sign. So today, we're going to uncover how even the most beautiful water can get sick, and how, believe it or not, nature itself might just hold the cure. I mean, it's a shocking sight, isn't it? You've got this beautiful, clear lake, and then, slowly but surely, it turns into something that looks like thick pea soup. Now, this isn't just ugly, it's a symptom of a really serious illness happening just below the surface. So, what is going on here? All right, to figure this out, we first need to diagnose the sickness. And this isn't some simple bug. It's more like a case of a lake being fed way too much of a good thing, pushing the whole system into a complete overload. The official name for this sickness is eutrophication. Kind of sounds complicated, but it's really not. It actually comes from the Greek words for well-nourished. But in this situation, being well-nourished is deadly. It's what happens when a lake or river gets flooded with nutrients. Think nitrogen and phosphorus, which then kicks off this absolutely devastating chain reaction. This whole thing unfolds like a row of dominoes tipping over. First, you get that overload of nutrients, usually from things like fertilizer runoff. This acts like a super steroid for algae on the surface, causing this explosive growth, an algal bloom. Soon, it's a thick green mat that blocks all the sunlight from getting through. So of course the plants living underwater die. Then, as bacteria get to work decomposing all that dead stuff, they use up massive amounts of oxygen, creating these dead zones where fish and other animals literally can't breathe. So what's the actual tipping point? Well, this is what's so crazy. It's shockingly small. For phosphorus, which is a major bad guy here, the critical level is just 20 micrograms per liter. To give you some perspective, that's like putting a single drop of ink into a big swimming pool. It just goes to show you how incredibly fragile these ecosystems are. One tiny little chemical shift can trigger a total collapse. But nutrient overload is only one part of the story. There's an even sneakier problem that can happen, a kind of contagion that quietly works its way up the food chain, getting stronger and more dangerous with every single step. So this happens through two processes that sound similar but are critically different. First, you've got bioaccumulation. That's where a toxin builds up inside a single organism over its life. But the real monster is biomagnification. This is when that toxin becomes more and more concentrated as it moves up the food chain. A little fish eats thousands of contaminated algae. A bigger fish eats hundreds of those little fish, and so on. By the time you get to the top predator, they end up with the most concentrated and the most deadly dose. And one of the most famous and frankly devastating examples of this whole process involved the pesticide DDT. Its catastrophic effects all started with a concentration in the water so tiny, it was almost impossible to even detect. Let's just follow the journey of this poison. It starts right here, in the water, at this nearly invisible concentration of just 0.00005 parts per million. Basically nothing, right? Well, just watch what happens as it gets into the food web. First, the algae soak up the DDT right from the water. And immediately, the concentration jumps to 0.04 parts per million. That is an 800-fold increase at the very first step. Just incredible. Okay, next up are the larger fish that eat the smaller contaminated critters. Now, the concentration of DDT in their body fat skyrockets to 2 parts per million. We are seeing the magnification effect in full terrifying force. And finally, at the very top of the food chain, birds of prey like eagles come along and eat the contaminated fish. By the time that DDT reaches them, it has magnified to a staggering 25 parts per million. From where we started, that is a 500,000-fold increase, 500,000 times more concentrated. And the consequence of this invisible poison was devastatingly real. At that concentration, DDT interfered with the birds' ability to form strong eggshells. Their eggs became so thin, so fragile, they would just break before the chicks could ever hatch. This whole ecological nightmare, which was famously documented in Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring, nearly drove species like the bald eagle to extinction. It's such a powerful lesson in how our actions can have these massive, unforeseen consequences. So with all these invisible threats lurking in our water, how do we possibly diagnose the problem before it's too late? Do we need a bunch of complex chemical tests for everything? Well, not always. Sometimes nature provides its own team of detectives. And these little detectives are called bioindicators. They're basically species that are super sensitive to changes in their environment. So by just observing them, are they there? Are they missing? Are they thriving? We can get a surprisingly accurate picture of how healthy an ecosystem really is. Think of it like this. You've got two teams of tiny aquatic critters. In the clean water corner, you have the sensitive guys, the good guys, like mayfly and stonefly nymphs. If you find a ton of them, that's a fantastic sign that the water is in great shape. But if they're all gone and the only thing you can find are the tough guys from the polluted water corner, like aquatic worms and midge larvae, that's a huge red flag. They are the living proof that something is seriously wrong. All right, so we've seen the sickness, the contagion, and the diagnosis. Let's pivot now to the most hopeful part of this whole story, the cure. And what's incredible is that the most effective cure might actually come from the tiniest organisms on the planet. This cure is called bioremediation, and it's a totally fascinating process where we basically send in a microscopic cleanup crew. We're talking about using naturally occurring bacteria, fungi, and other microbes that have this amazing ability to literally eat, transform, or neutralize toxic pollutants, turning them into harmless stuff like water and carbon dioxide. And let me tell you, this cleanup crew has an impressive resume. They can tackle everything from oil spills and pesticides to nasty industrial solvents and even toxic heavy metals like lead and mercury. It is just mind-blowing to think that these tiny little organisms have evolved the perfect biochemical tools to break down some of our absolute worst messes. So after all this, why does it matter so much? Well, it's because the story of our water's health is, in the end, completely inseparable from the story of our own health. And the stakes really couldn't be any higher. The human cost of poor water quality is just staggering. Globally, unsafe water leads to an estimated 1.5 billion cases of diarrhea every year. And tragically, this results in the deaths of over 500,000 children under the age of 5 every single year. These are not just statistics. They represent a massive and, frankly, preventable public health crisis. And on a personal level, the impact is immediate and it's awful. You've got all the miserable symptoms, but the real danger, especially for kids and the elderly, is dehydration. It is just a stark, powerful reminder that having access to clean, safe water is the absolute bedrock of public health. So, we've seen how a lake can get sick from being overfed, how invisible poisons can literally climb the food chain, and how nature itself offers us both the warning signs and, thankfully, the cure. It all comes back to this one idea. Our water is constantly communicating with us. It's telling a story about balance, about contamination, and ultimately about our own well-being. So the final question is, what story is the water in your world telling you?